Hey Dan, got a new haircut?
No, Emily, it's the same haircut I've had for a while. Why, does it look different?
Oh no, I must be thinking of someone else. Sorry.
I don't know who you might be mixing me up with.
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it.
So tell me, weren't you at a conference this last week?
I was. I went down to Orlando for the FPA, Financial Planning Association NexGen conference, which is a conference for uh, early and new financial planners that are all in relatively similar stages of their career. I believe you were there as well, no?
I was there, although there were certainly times where I didn't see you. We must have not crossed paths for certain big portions of time.
Making friends, I guess.
Sure.
Well, Emily, usually on the podcast, I believe that there's a question posed, essentially, what did you learn this week? So Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of last week, we spent time at this conference. Tell me, what did you learn?
Well, that can be answered a number of ways. So to start, I'll go the direction of, some of the things that we covered in the session, the actual educational portion of the conference. There was kind of the opening session that I attended where they were talking quite a bit about just general advice for new and young incoming planners about the benefits of, a lot of us in the industry lean towards wanting to work remotely. That's just, I don't know if it's a generational thing or people like the flexibility or what, but we talked quite a bit about the actual you should just go and work in person if you have the option, especially early on in your career. There's so much value to be had in these conversations you're having at the office. And, if you have downtime, someone says, hey, I'm working on this project, like, let's have a second set of eyes on it. Or do you want to come and like collaborate with this on me? And I do find that to be true, especially here, because when we are all in the office, we do such a team based approach to the planning that I definitely agreed with that portion of the seminar where they're like, listen, remote work is very tempting. And, maybe later in life you can start prioritizing that if that's like interests you and if you're someone who likes to work from home. But there is so much value in the office, and to be careful not to rush through that portion of your career and just skip the in person just to get rid of the commute because you're going to miss out on a lot of learning.
Yeah, it's funny hearing that from you because I know how much you love working from home.
I
But
love working from home. I like talking at the office. If you are on the receiving end of it all the time. Like, hey Daniel, what about this? Hey Daniel, look at this. Where I'm at home, it's just me. It's quiet. But there's something to be said about being 10 feet away from somebody and being like, hey, let's look at this with me. What can we do here? What am I missing? Maybe you see a planning opportunity that I don't.
I completely agree, though. I mean, my old firm back in Philadelphia, where I worked for a little over 4 years, was fully virtual. And there were no micro interactions or little, casual conversations in between meetings that we have on a day-to-day here. And in addition to that, we met with all of our clients via Zoom. Uh, but we meet now, I'd say, with the majority of our clients at least once a year in person. And it's really hard to replicate the way a meeting feels and the way we interact with people in person on Zoom. I think for us, we probably overestimate how useful and convenient meeting on Zoom is, and I'm sure it's not nearly as useful for the client. And I think having both the option and flexibility is great, but you can't beat meetings and interactions with people in person. And I think that's probably here to stay. And like you said, I think that's the best way to learn, especially early in your career.
Sure. And I think it kind of provides a better client experience. I know they've done surveys and stuff on that. Like, if you ask a bunch of advisors what they think of Zoom meetings, they're like, oh, they're great. They're really efficient. We get a lot done. You can work right up until the last minute before they start. And everyone's excited about that. But if you ask the clients, they're like, oh, it was, a little impersonal, or it wasn't quite the same, or I don't think I got as much value out of the meeting, even if you talked about the same items or the same agenda that you would have in person or on Zoom. They certainly prefer it. So it was definitely interesting to have conversations like that at this conference when there were so many new advisors, but there also was a lot of older people and career changers that were like, hey, yeah, in person is still important. Don't get too drawn into this remote work world just yet. You'll really be missing out on a lot. So I thought that session was really interesting. And then I went to one on but Wendy Wright was her name. She's a financial therapist, and she was kind of giving a talk on the wealth transfer dynamics between generations. Because inherited wealth, on the app, when you first hear about it, you're like, oh, that would be amazing. I would love to inherit $1 million. Who's going to turn that down? That sounds amazing. But they said that 80% of inherited wealth feels like a burden to people. And so it's a very sensitive subject as a financial planner when you're working with people to first, encourage them not to rush, right? Like, you inherited this money, you can wait a couple of months before you make any big moves. You don't need to figure out the rest of your life as soon as you receive an inheritance. To really caution people to slow down, which can seem obvious, but also you receive a big lump sum of money and you're like, wow, this is life changing. So my life should change. But it doesn't have to right away.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a specific client I'm actually thinking of that ran into a situation like this, and I think they handled it really well. When they came to us, they had inherited this money a few years ago, and when we asked, okay, is there a reason we haven't done anything with it? It was really just we don't want our life to change too drastically immediately, and we didn't know what to do with it, and we don't want to make a bad decision. And I think, that can be applied to a lot of areas, whether it's an inheritance or something else. It's better to sometimes do nothing than to make a drastic decision that negatively impacts your life in the long term. And that was a really good presentation because it made me realize that, when I think inheritance, I think, great, this can change your life for the better. But for a lot of people, it comes with a lot of stress, right? There are people that might think they deserve or are owed a portion of that money, or the person inheriting it might feel insecure about this new level of wealth that they've acquired, and it's a tricky thing to navigate, and there's emotions in regard to the death and the passing and how this money was inherited. It's not as simple as, cool, I have $500,000 that I didn't have yesterday, let me go buy a nice car.
Sure. And I think there was another point that she brought up during her presentation that kind of really drove home the point of how important it is to know your client and really talk to them and get the whole story before you just start prescribing advice and saying, here's what we're going to do. We're going to move this money. We're going to do this. You're going to buy that. There's certain circumstances where, like, maybe the inheritance came from an abuser. Maybe you don't have a good relationship with your parents or your spouse or whoever it may be. So you receive this money and it's a very conflicting experience because of something like that as well, which is where someone like her, a financial therapist, is often then looped into it. And she talked about that a little bit. But I think that's something people forget. They think, oh, if you're getting money from them, obviously you had a great relationship. Otherwise, why would they have left it to you? And that's not necessarily the case. It can be a very confusing experience just beyond how life changing an inheritance could be, just in a financial aspect only.
Yeah, completely agree. Anything else?
Those are kind of the big highlights for me from that session. I went to one that talked a lot about student loans and, funding education and things like that, especially because there's all these changes in this one big, beautiful bill, which I won't really get into the actual details of that because we've covered that in a previous podcast episode. But it was interesting to kind of see how much more planning there is around that rather than just the traditional what people think, like, okay, you open a 529 for your kids and, help me calculate how much I need to save, and then that's kind of as far as they go with the planning piece. But there's actually a lot more opportunities there than I think people realize, and a lot more planning is required. She said it's very common for parents to not kind of accurately in their heads inflate how much college is going to cost. They inflate it at possibly like the standard rate of inflation, but as we know, education is actually going up quite a bit more than that year over year. So, again, it's having that conversation with people where it's like, hey, we actually need to talk about this and make sure on the same page of what funding college is going to look like, not just the numbers aspect of what people think maybe a financial planner is going to do.
Sounds like a good use of your time.
Yeah, but enough for me. What did you take away from the sessions you went to? I know you and I weren't necessarily in all the same ones.
Hmm. Yeah, so I went to the financial therapy one much as you did, and I thought that was really interesting. I think you covered a lot of what I took away from it pretty well. The one that I went to that you were not in, that I got a lot out of, was a presentation by Jack Giardino. He's a CFP out in Kansas City with his own RIA. And he was essentially talking about uh, where the future of financial planning is going. And I'd say one of the really interesting takeaways I took out of this was just the statistic that he put on the screen. essentially the fact that 80% of affluent households would be willing to pay essentially 50 basis points or half a percentage more for financial planning from a human as opposed to AI or technology. And we had a little bit of a discussion around it, right? So why is that? And I think it essentially comes down to the fact that humans want to deal with humans, right? Like earlier we talked about inheritance. Those are really difficult conversations to have with a robot. And people have emotions and feelings and messy lives, right? And having a human to talk to those things about is really important. Will AI and this technology continue to improve? Yes. Will it get to a that it can be a integral part of our day to day and make our lives easier? Yes. But what really will happen and where we see things going is it will just allow us to spend more time with people. It's not going to replace the relationships we have. It's not going to replace the deep conversations that we take part in. In fact, it's going to free up our time for other areas, right? Data gathering, analyzing statements, and it's going to allow us to spend more time having more conversations with more people. And I think that's really important because that's where us as financial planners do our best work. It's in front of the people. The technical knowledge and knowing, what's deductible and which account to use and insurance is really table stakes. The real value a planner provides is the human element of the conversation and being able to empathize with a client when they go through a difficult time in their life and telling them that they're being heard and letting them know that you're there for them. A robot can't replace that. And the higher net worth families, especially in the $1 to $10 million range, are willing to simply pay more for that. And I found that to be a really interesting part of the conversation.
Yeah, I do think that's interesting. There's so many people in my personal life that aren't in the financial planning world or finance at all, and I get that question a lot. They're like, "Oh, are you worried that AI is going to replace you, or, are you worried about your job in this industry that you're in?" I'm like, "No, not really." And then the conversation was so different at this conference with other planners, where I didn't have a conversation with even one single person who was worried about it replacing them. There was that conversation of some, you should at a certain point incorporate it and know how to use it, because like you're not going to get replaced by AI, but you could get replaced by someone who knows how to use AI because they're using it to free up their time. Like you say, they're using it for perhaps note taking or to a certain level of data analysis, but they're not going, it can't replace that human connection and those conversations we have and the relationships we have with clients, especially after you've worked with someone for years. I would be very surprised if everybody suddenly just had a robo planner that they were going to pour out their heart to after they received an inheritance or something.
Yeah, and then I'd say the other part of the conversation or presentation I thought was really interesting was succession planning for financial planning businesses and advisors. I believe the statistic was 27% of financial planners and practices have a formalized and documented succession plan in place, which means the rest don't, which essentially means there are so many opportunities out there to buy into practices to take care of clients that simply aren't being taken advantage of at present. And I don't know what the statistic would be for other businesses, but whether it's financial planning or not, I would assume the majority of businesses don't have that in place. At least small businesses and those that we interact with on a daily basis in the community here. And that's really important. A lot of these folks think they're going to live forever. The reality is, none of us will. And putting these documents and processes in place, one, probably needs to be done considerably earlier than you might think it does. And two, will probably take considerably longer to put in place than you think it will, right? There's a lot of stories out there of people who wanted to get this done in a 1 to 3 year time frame. Then 3 years later, we're still 1 to 3 years away. And I think it's just important to recognize, like, even take Warren Buffett, who's 99 years old and stepping away from Berkshire Hathaway. The plan and succession that he put in place was a multi-year process, and they really took a lot of time and care to make sure there was business continuity, when Warren Buffett is to leave Berkshire Hathaway. Are most of the businesses in Longmont or even in the United States Berkshire Hathaway? No. That doesn't mean they shouldn't have a formalized succession plan in place, and there's no exception for the financial planning community either.
Yeah, I think it's important for advisors on both ends of that to think that through, like you say, like the ones who are retiring and maybe going to step away one day. I think it ends up being harder for them to kind of give up these client relationships than they thought because they are so close to a lot of them, like they've been working together for years and they're friends. And then on the other end, these younger advisors that are wanting to be the succession plan, that they're reminded to be patient. Like, look, it is going to be a long process. You're not going to just sign on somewhere and buy a bunch of clients and then take over a practice. Like, it is this ongoing thing that requires a lot of work and a lot of discussion and a lot of good contracts and getting things in writing and making sure it's a good fit, right? Like, no one's going to hand over their clients to someone that is not going to be a good fit for them, nor should you want to take over something that maybe isn't right for you just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, and I think the last part there that's important is, like you said, in writing. There's a big difference between a handshake agreement where the older generation advisor says, "Yeah, 1 to 3 years, we'll get this in place," and having that in writing and being able to enforce it. Um, Most of the folks that I talked to this week, even those who are intending on succeeding an older advisor, don't have things in writing. And these are financial planners who do this stuff for a living, right? So it's so important, whether it's our industry or any other industry where there's small businesses and you're thinking about succession and want to extract tangible monetary value from the business that you've worked toward building, you need to have formalized and documented processes and plans in place. This stuff doesn't happen through handshakes. It happens in writing and it happens in documented, formalized processes. And if a quarter of advisors that are going to be retiring in the next 10 to 20 years don't have that stuff in place, there's a massive opportunity for so many advisors out there and for a lot of families and individuals to get some really great advice from some really great planners.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really inspirational to meet a lot of the other planners in industry that are new and up and coming. And it's like, oh, things are looking good. Actually, I met a lot of really impressive people that I really enjoyed at the conference. So, you know, the statistic of not having very many succession plans in place can be a little bit scary. But when I see this next generation that is coming up and theoretically going to kind of take over these relationships, it did soothe me a little bit.
All right, so talk to me about that a little bit, right? We talked about this generational wealth transfer and just inheriting money, right? We're talking about where the industry potentially is going and some of the things to look out for. What would you say is the benefit for you, at least, like meeting other advisors, right? Like we're not getting families or individuals that want to work with us from those meetings and from the time we spend in Orlando. So exactly what's the benefit of it for you?
I would actually say I got more value at this conference out of the talking to other people and peers and stuff than I did the sessions. And that's not because the sessions weren't helpful, but I just thought it was so incredibly valuable to speak to these other people that are coming from a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences and firms and different ways of doing things, right? Like my whole experience has been here at this firm where I work. I haven't worked anywhere else in industry. So I know how we do things very, very well. But then, it's kind of fun to say, okay, well, how are you guys doing things at your firm? Like sometimes they have good ideas and it's like, oh, maybe we should be implementing that, or maybe we should consider that, or that's something that we're not doing. And then just looking at, what they're focusing on. It's some people were going really heavy still in the educational track and they're like, I want to earn more designations, or I'm studying, or I'm doing this. And other people are really focusing on business development or, trying to be a succession plan, or where do I want my career to be? And talking to people that work at other, small firms or family practices, and then everyone up to like these much, much bigger companies that are completely different roles. We may have the same job title. I may have been at the conference speaking to another associate financial planner, but our jobs are completely different, and that's just based around where we work. And I think it's so valuable to talk to them and compare and not just get stuck in habits and in ruts. Like, okay, well, this is what I do and this is the way I do it. And, that's fine. You should always be learning and growing. And so talking to other people like that, I would say was even better than the sessions for me.
I think I tend to agree. It's the same thing with like coming into an office, right? Like you get micro interactions in between actual meetings and doing actual work. and that's really beneficial. And the same goes for the conference, right? Like some of the best conversations I had weren't when a presentation was occurring. It was on the walk for 20 minutes while we're going to a restaurant. It's, after hours when we go to see some music or whatever the thing is. And I think those micro interactions and the things that happen outside of organized spaces are just as valuable, if not more valuable. And I think one of the greatest things that you're able to get from that is just perspective, right? So you said like there's a lot of people here, big firms, small firms, various personalities, someone that's a career changer versus someone that's been doing this out of college and everything in between. But for the most part, we all are in the same stage in our career. And that means we all have similar problems, challenges, areas for growth and opportunities. And I think it's refreshing to be like, oh, my concerns and the things that I'm working on are not unique to me. I'm not special in any way. And these are things that other advisors who've been doing this longer have been through and have, worked through. And I think it's reassuring to be able to know like, oh yeah, I'm not doing this by myself, even though I work in a very small firm. There are so many other people out there that are facing the exact same challenges and difficulties as me and you.
Yeah. And I think it's helpful to have other people that are in then, very similar place to you, be able to give you advice and tips on things that you're doing or need help with. Like there was somebody in my cohort or a smaller group, and he was saying he worked at like a family firm and it was a father and son and then him. And he is not of the family, right? So he's like the dynamics there and like trying to figure this out were difficult and much more challenging. He's like, it's hard enough to work on a small team in certain ways, but then when they're related and they're a family, these are the things that I'm struggling with. And then for the rest of us to be able to say, okay, well, if I was you, this is what I would do. And this is something I think you need to consider, or this is something you should bring up and communicate on. And I think you kind of take advice more seriously, and it's a little bit more helpful if you realize that other people understand where you're at, because there was such a wide variety of people. Because then there's somebody else in, same cohort, same thing. And she was talking about the challenge of being a mother and being busy in industry, trying to build up your reputation, and you're oftentimes working long hours and studying and doing all these extra things. And she said, I had this guilt around, I felt like I was being a bad mom. I wasn't spending time with my kids. So, she was sharing all these things that she did to make sure she was engaged in her kid's life and being the best mom that she could be. And it was really inspirational and great for her. But there's such a wide spectrum there of like someone's problem being, how do I be a really good mom and wife? And someone else saying, hey, I'm young, I'm new, I'm trying to fit into this small firm and kind of make a name for myself. Those are two very, very different problems and challenges that these people were facing. But our group was still able to kind of talk that through with them and I think come up with some pretty good ideas of, what they should be doing or thinking about. And I think those conversations were so valuable compared to a session where you're sitting and learning, which is, of course, a different type of value. But those conversations I don't think can be underestimated or shouldn't be underestimated anyway.
No, and at the end of the day, right, like iron sharpens iron. So surrounding yourself with intelligent, like-minded advisors that are also extremely driven and want to go to similar places in their career in 10, 20, 30 years is really inspiring. Like I leave the conference coming back here to Longmont and like wanting to do really great work, right? Not that I don't already, but it's inspiring to see what everybody else is doing and see people that are, simply better than me. It's like, wow, I aspire to have your level of technical knowledge, or the way you're able to navigate a conversation is excellent, and aspiring to be more like them in that way, in that area of their life and professional career. And I think that, there's 200 people there, 200 other people in similar situations to us. There's 200 unique stories and ways that people are approaching this career. And I think it's really great now. It's really great, one, to get their perspectives, and two, learn from the things they do really well and see what you can take and apply to your own career.
Right. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you had a good time overall. Was there anything that was like a favorite part to you just beyond the general networking and meeting of people that you took away from this?
As a firm, we value ourselves on transparency. And I want to thank the people, not only the cohort leaders that helped moderate and direct the conversations, but the other planners for being ultra transparent in what they're really facing, how much they make, right? How that is comparable to how much I make or how much another advisor makes. Being very open about why we enjoy this career and what motivates us and all those things. I think I just want to speak on the level of transparency that was taking place over the 3 days. I don't think that's a specific thing I learned, but everybody being open to doing that is something I think older generations probably don't do, right? Boomers and older folks like to say that you don't talk about money in polite company, right? You keep it hush hush and you don't speak about it. I think newer generations of advisors and just people are realizing that that's not true. There's a lot more power and usefulness and utility in sharing compensation, in sharing the roles and responsibilities that you have on a daily basis in financial planning or any other industry. The only person who benefits from you not sharing that information is probably the employer, because they can keep paying you less and give you more work and pay less for it. And I think being transparent about that stuff is really beneficial, and everybody in the room benefits from it.
Yeah, I would agree. I know we get used to talking about money at work because we talk about other people's money. We're talking to our clients about it, but it is equally as important to talk about your own situation and say, okay, like, maybe you're talking to someone and they're trying to compare two different jobs and like, well, this one makes, $5,000 more per year. And I know you had a conversation like this with somebody and it's like, well, what are the benefits like though? What are the other things? What are you going to learn there? Like, what are the other reasons to maybe make a move or not make a move other than an extra $5,000 a year, which if you're not making, if it's a lateral move in every other way, maybe it's not the best choice for you to do that and to really have that in-depth conversation instead of keeping it under wraps and not getting advice from other people about it.
Well said. Anything else you want to add?
I don't know. I feel like we've covered it. We talked about it so much throughout on our long delayed flight back as well, since we had such a pleasant trip home last night. So I think we covered that. I don't know. Would you go again next year? I hear they're in Dallas next time, it sounds like.
Well, I've never been to Texas, so that's nice. So I can't wait for that. And yes, I do plan on going next year and plan on continuing to hopefully give back to that space and contribute in meaningful ways, hopefully.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a good time. I think Evan will be glad to hear you're coming back. I saw you making a lot of friends over the week. You're a very, very social guy.
You think you'll be there?
Yeah, I think I would like to. I think it would be even more fun the next year because, of course, this is my first year going into it, so I didn't know anybody yet. So the first day kind of feels like the first day of school where you're walking into the cafeteria and you're like, oh, I got to go up to people and, hi, nice to meet you. What are we doing? And then after a few hours, like, okay, I've got some people now who I'm talking to and feel like I was just hitting my stride by the time we had to turn around and fly home. So I think it would be fun to follow up then throughout the year, of course, stay in touch with people, but then keep going year over year and actually have deepening relationships and I would assume, deeper conversations and better connections then too.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Certainly does. Well, now we're back in Longmont, so I guess we'll get back to it and look forward to next year.
Sounds good. Cheers, Emily.
The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.